Hey, welcome to another conversation, and this conversation's about mental health now. And we're just talking about just I guess, fostering good mental health so that we don't find ourselves in a place of mental illness. But at the same time, where we're at right now is there's just been a whole recognizing for a lot of people, just this whole subject of trauma and the impact of trauma on people's lives and how it outplays in people's lives. And I guess my hope in this conversation as we're talking about it, it's not just that we're helping people identify it. Now I know why I'm like I am, and it is linked to issues that would be associated with the word trauma. But also we're sort of hopefully helping people understand if you're living with people who have had, you know, anything from severe to, if mild, if there's such a thing, to help people understand people a little better, because I think sometimes if we can understand, it just builds a great sense of compassion in people's lives for what's going on in other people's lives. So that's what this is all about. So thanks for being with us. And so we've got Anna with us again, and we're continuing on from last week, and Rocky. And so I guess to start out, should we do a little recap maybe? Because we sort of finished up with last time was like, you know, the importance of friendship and those sorts of things. So we're just going to take it one step further, but a quick recap would probably be good, yeah?
Yeah,
yep.
Absolutely. So I think that the key theme that we've been unpacking over the last few weeks has been this theme of trauma and helping people understand what it is, what happens in, what's the human experience of trauma, and to kind of peel the layers that are involved in this experience. And we started with sharing some information on what trauma actually is and how we experience trauma. And in that context, we explored what the trauma imprints are. And the trauma imprints are the elements that reflect the enduring, lasting experience of trauma. So they're the enduring effects of trauma in the body and the brain.
All right, good. Okay, so that was great, Dr. Anna. So
what
just
does it
a
mean?
little bit, just
a little summary.
Just imprints.
Yeah.
Because I'm aware, and you know, from my own study and all of the stuff that goes with life, that there can be, are these imprints sort of this memory or this partial memory that evokes all sorts of emotion and all of that. It's like this happening that is not in my past, it's still in my present, because it's sort of, it happened then, but it's still part of my thinking now and impacts. Is that what?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you used the word memory. If we think about memories and how we experience life, everyday experiences are filed into your memory system in a certain way. They're, you know, a normal everyday experience will be processed and filed in your memory, and you can recall it at any time if you want to, and there'll be different filing systems for it. But when you experience trauma, what happens there is very different, and the traumatic event is stored in your memory in a different way. So first of all, we need to understand that the way your brain stores the traumatic event is different. It's not processed as a normal event. And when it's being stored away, it's almost split from your conscious awareness process that normally processes everyday experiences before filing it in your system. Traumatic events are experienced differently. And there are parts of your brain, the rational, executive parts of your brain are switched off when you experience those traumatic events, and I can explain why later.
Well, I was just going to say, because I think people, if they understand how the brain works, and we've been talking about this a little bit, the reason it files it there is because that's where our defensive mechanisms kick in. So trauma says something is happening, and I have to defend my. So much of our emotional part of our brain is this almost raw defensive. I need to get angry. I need to attack. I need to lash out because I'm being hurt here, and so I'm now. It's my defensive mechanism, and it gets locked into that part of the brain rather than my ability just to all right, I can that happened, but it's now locked into this defensive thing. So now it's almost like I go through the whole of my life processing so much of my today's interactions from this defensive aspect.
And it is a self-defense mechanism. It's interesting that some of the research on trauma refers to the mind as incredibly fragile. And when we talk about the mind, or the thoughts, if you like, we're referring to the cognitive level of the human experience. And cognitive means thoughts. It's your mind. And your mind is actually described in some of the research as incredibly fragile. And you have different parts of your brain, such as your emotional system, which is your self-defense system. And it's almost like your emotional system, your emotional brain is trying to protect the fragile mind. And that's why all of that self-defense mechanism kicks in. And we actually process traumatic events with what we call dissociation, which is the kind of dissociative mechanisms of the emotional system kicking in and causing all sorts of physiological, cognitive, emotional, relational, etc. responses. All of that chain of events happens as a secondary layer, and that layer is a self-defense mechanism that is putting all of those things into motion. But actually, our own self-defense mechanisms, the dissociative mechanisms that split the event from the normal memory process and turn it into something different, that actually exacerbates the trauma. And that's what happens when people then experience things that will trigger those trauma imprints, back to that expression. So those imprints are the lasting effects that are caused not only by the event, but also caused by how you process that event due to all these self-defense mechanisms.
So the importance of people understanding, well, there's that, but also then understanding there are triggers. Because I guess part of the recovery that we want to encourage people into is there's a certain element of identifying the triggers. And I guess that's for another conversation, but this whole thing about triggers. How come I now feel like this, or I feel I'm going to withdraw, or I'm going to lash out, or whatever it might be? Where'd that come from? That's that triggers thing.
Exactly. And again, it links to these lasting effects of trauma, which are the imprints. They're the enduring effects, which then are experienced at all levels of the human experience, really. And your triggers could happen. And what I mean by that is, you could be triggered at a cognitive level, for example. There could be, and what I mean by that is there could be internal thoughts, negative thoughts that start popping up that will trigger that trauma again. Or there could be triggers at a relational level. There's something in that relationship with that person that is suddenly triggering that trauma again. There could be triggers at an existential level. The existential level is the sense-making. It's the framework with which you see the world around you and stuff. So there could be things that you're seeing in the news or in social media that will trigger that personal traumatic event for you again. There could be triggers at a somatic level. What I mean by that is the physiological, the visual, the auditory, what you hear, sounds can trigger. We know this from people who experience post-traumatic stress disorder, that certain sounds can trigger a traumatic experience, and they can feel everything again, triggered by a sound or an image. There could be triggers at an emotional level, so certain emotions can start internally triggering that trauma again.
Because I think it's important, that for people to, I guess, understand that, because if we're not careful, and even understanding that can happen in people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we're not careful, we just like, well, why? Why did you just explode?
And understanding
Why?
it's like not all of these, everything that we've talked about in terms of imprints and triggers, it's involuntary. So it's like an event has happened.
Yeah.
It's gone below the cognitive brain into like the deeper, older part of my brain for no reason of my own. My body has just felt, and my brain has felt, this is a life-threatening incident. So I'm going to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And then in my day-to-day life, there are triggers, things that remind me of that reminds my brain of this life-threatening incident. So it's going to obviously react in a defensive way to preserve my life.
Exactly.
And none of this is by choice. So like you said, Gary, it's like, if you're not in the brainmobile, if you're not in the body, you're like, why are you overreacting to something that seems so small? But if you're driving in the mobile, you're like, I have no idea, but my body is telling me, I just react because my body says, this could lead to me a negative event. So I need to do whatever I can. And humans are so different. Some people fight, some people are angry, some people cry, some people withdraw, but they're all reacting to involuntary. I think that's what's been really insightful for me of these conversations. It's like, it's not that someone has thought, I need to overreact to this. It's my body, I'm behind my body in this moment. For some reason, my body is reacting in a certain way, and I'm following and trying to understand that. I think that's been really insightful as well in these conversations, to understand that there is an almost a surrender, like it's a surrendering to the autopilot. Sometimes it's just like, this is happening and I don't know what's happening. And for people that we care about or love or in close fellowship with, you see someone reacting in a certain way you don't really understand, or you're trying to be like, snap out of it, or like, is this not that dramatic? But it's understanding, like you said, it's these imprints are like handprints in the sand, and you feel like you can just put your handprint in the sand and it washes over. But the imprint is like, imagine the handprint
in cement.
Yeah, it's in
Very
cement.
deep,
And the water keeps going over, and you're like, for me, I've put my hand in sand, and I'm like, Gary, man, I just hand in sand. Why? Just forget about it. It only happened yesterday. But for you, it's like you put your hand in concrete. And as much as the water can come, it needs a whole
And,
taking up.
Yeah, and as I can't remember where I was reading it, but the person put it like this, where it's like you can never be present.
Yes.
You're always influenced by your past.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like here's a past that I can't escape. Which I think for a lot of people who are believers, there's this sense of, I thought my past is finished with. Why does my past keep turning up in my present? And the impact of trauma doesn't allow you to live present, because it drags.
Your present is contaminated by the past.
And it just keeps dragging it always into, so you never got a clean present, so to speak, where you feel like, oh, wow, I'm focused now, and there's this battle between being present and this past, always just ruling where you are right now.
Yeah, and it's again, I think what's hopefully liberating about this conversation is that it helps people understand the mechanisms behind this, and in doing so, that increased awareness of what actually is happening, how it's happening, why it's happening, this increased awareness and understanding of these mechanisms can really help people move forward, because once you understand this, once you accept this, it doesn't mean that it has to stay like this forever, by the
Yeah,
way.
because that's what I was going to say, because there's the getting out.
Yeah, exactly.
Because even, you know, I'm very mindful, you know, in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus, you know, reads from the scroll of Isaiah 61, and it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, he has anointed me to. And one of those twos is to heal the brokenhearted.
Yes.
And that term brokenhearted means those with bruised insides.
Yes.
And so trauma is a little bit like the bruising
Yeah.
of the who we are. Whatever the event is, whatever's taken place, has actually bruised me.
Yeah.
And you know, there's things that, and that's what we'll talk about, what's important in helping that bruising heal.
Yeah.
But I think it's what's also important as we get into this, we're not talking about Jesus is not in the picture.
No.
To me, a lot of this, the insightfulness in all this is where I need Jesus in my picture.
Exactly.
And I wrote a little statement in my journal just yesterday or today where it's like, it's in my humility that I get to experience God. And my humility is the sense of, I need you here.
Yeah.
That's a sense of humility is, I can't do it by myself, I need you.
Yeah.
As
So
part of the
there's-
process.
Yeah, and so there's this, and the good thing is people dealing with traumatic issues in their lives, that he literally says that he's anointed me to,
Yeah.
and is to heal the brokenhearted. And so people who are, this is all stirring up in their lives, there's hope. You don't have to, this is not what the rest of your life's going to look like.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, okay, so, all right. So we talked about the power of relationships and things like that.
Yeah.
So we're on to week 4, I think now. So let's talk about some of those things, the practical things that you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've started unpacking some of them already. And I know we talked about relationships last week, but really social support is such a key part of trauma recovery, and in fact of the whole healing journey, that I think there's more. There are other layers, I think, that we need to understand in that kind of the importance of being really deeply socially connected. There's definitely more that we can unpack there.
Right. So to get you going on this, right? So let me read this, because I think for a lot of people, right, the reason I want to read this out and then get going is for a lot of people, you go, you know, so say for example, I'm talking to Rocky, or so I could be the person, the one that's being counselled, or I could be the counsellor, and so he unloads, right, which is good, and then I say, this is what you need to do, and always one of the first things you need to do is you need to connect with people, right? Social connection is a key component to the healing of so many different things. But here's a fascinating thing about trauma in that, because what he will say to me is, okay, but he won't do it,
Yeah.
right? Or if he's honest, he'll say, every time I try, I fail, or it just doesn't work, or I feel like there's these, in other words, he's saying, social connection is not the answer for me because I can't do it.
Yeah.
Almost, right?
Yeah.
So this is what I found fascinating. So true healing is impossible without recognition of our common humanity and our common destiny. We are fundamentally social creatures. Our brains are wired to foster working and playing together. Trauma devastates the social engagement systems and interferes with cooperation, nurturing, and the ability to function and function as a productive member of the social setting that I'm in. So it's almost like, so here's the challenge that I want to just go, right? So we say social connection is really important, friendships are really important, but the one thing you'll discover about yourself where trauma has really impacted your life, the thing you find most difficult is social connection.
And it's the thing that's going to play the biggest part in
It's the
your
biggest
healing.
part, yet it's the thing that has been shattered in you.
Yeah.
So it's like the answer is the thing that's been, your ability to pursue the answer is the thing that's been destroyed.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
doctor?
Help us. Help us.
But do you get, because I think this is a dilemma that people have, because we can sit down and talk about friendship. Yeah, but I find friendship really difficult. We talk to people who are depressed because of isolation. They haven't quite really rationalized why they're isolated. Okay, depression is there because of it. And you go, but the key to getting out of your depression is connection with other people.
Yeah.
But I can't connect with other people, that's why I'm isolated. So now I'm in this, is it catch-22?
Yeah, it's like a loop. Yeah, it's just
This,
It is.
this thing. So
Yeah. So
do
I
you
think
get the problem I'm now posing to you?
absolutely. It's
Yep.
it's the problem that I hear a lot,
Yep.
and we're all very aware of it. Again, this is why this conversation is important, because I think it raises the levels of awareness of people and really helps them understand, again, the mechanisms of, you know, that are involved in all of this process, and knowing that the one thing that will probably be the most painful in terms of taking the first steps is the one thing that you really, really need to do, because it's really your lifeline. It's the thing that it's the most important aspect of your healing journey, of your recovery. So I think reframing things as from, because the thing about, again, negative, the imprints, the trauma imprints, is that there's, at some point, the effects of trauma are mixed in with our own defense mechanisms, as we've unpacked already. And what's interesting about these different levels of defense mechanisms is that in addition to the emotional system throwing all sorts of responses into the mix, making you feel all sorts of different things, you also have your mind that at some point starts kicking in with negative thoughts. And those negative thoughts about yourself, about others, about how others see you, all these things end up interwoven into your being and into this traumatic experience that is charging your existence. And that means that it's almost like you get stuck, like we said before, and trauma never ends. What you need to do about negative thoughts is understand that that's the one thing that you can change. You don't have to believe every crap that your mind
That's
thinks.
important for people to grab, because if you talk to people or if you have a tendency to be negative, you go, I just can't help it. It's just me. So you've gone, psst, I'm in a box I can't get out of. But you're saying you're not in a box that you can't get out of.
You created
You're
that
not in a box. And I can tell you that there is one thing that everyone at home can do, and it will work for everyone, which is, and I've talked about this before, but we only scratched the surface, which is questions. Questions will help you refocus, reframe your thoughts, and therefore your mindset, your patterns of thinking, just like that.
It's so liberating, I think, asking questions and asking the right question, because you get to better questions. So even if you're like, I think like this, why do I have this view of myself? Why do I have this view of myself? Because as you said, Gary, it's not.
So we're talking about internal dialogue.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't have. It's not your common denominator. It doesn't have to be. It's a choice to make it your common denominator. So if you start asking and getting to the roots as to why do I do that? Why do I think about that? Why every time I look in the mirror do I think this?
And even get creative with your questions as well, with this sort of internal dialogue. What I mean by getting creative is go beyond absolutely challenge with the why, you know, what's behind this, but try to go beyond that and try to ask yourself, you know, what would it feel like if I had the opposite thought to this one? For example, if, like I said before, the trauma impacts will have an effect on your kind of at a relational level, and they will impact how you see other people, how you see yourself, how you relate to others, and therefore you're stuck in the bubble. And that prevents you from the thing that can really help you heal, which is other people, reaching out to others. Vulnerability, obviously, you need to embrace vulnerability. That's easier said than done. People, if you can't do it, you can't do it.
But does vulnerability begin with being vulnerable to yourself and before God?
That's it. That's it. Vulnerability to others begins with that, with being vulnerable with yourself, with your condition, with your humanity. And that's the humility that you were journaling about, right? It's really understanding your humanity, understanding the mechanisms, understanding that actually I believe it's God's design, because it makes us, you know, it keeps us grounded to something that other than ourselves, because really when we're, you know, the traumatized brain cannot heal without others, without, I believe, without the intervention of God and people. So it kind of keeps you in that place where you really need to be vulnerable, but first of all, vulnerable to yourself. But I think we all need to understand that when we are stuck in that cycle of negative thinking, you can ask yourself some creative questions. You know, for example, if this is, first of all, what is this thought? Okay, let's look at it then. What is the thought? The thought is that this person cannot love me, because this person will never accept me because I'm broken, I'm this, I'm that, whatever that thought is. Just look at it and know what it is. Listen to it, because you really need to in order to then challenge it. So instead of suppressing it, hiding it, because actually suppressing it keeps it even stronger. It keeps the hold that it has on you even bigger. So really, what is it? And after that, get a little bit creative and go, okay, so what would it feel like if I had the opposite thought? Let's just go there for a minute. What you do when you ask that question, you know that questions will channel the attention of your brain like nothing else. When you ask, or when you're asked a question, you will automatically just channel every single thing in your brain to finding the answer to that question. That's why questions are so important. So if I start asking myself, so what would it feel like? Notice what I'm doing here. You're now channeling the attention to your emotions and to your, you know, your feelings. So what would it feel like if I had a different thought? So you're making a connection, a logical, rational connection, because when you're doing this exercise, you're engaging your rational brain, but you're making a connection between your rational and your emotional system by asking your executive brain, let's have a think about what it would feel like if I had a different thought, the opposite thought, which is, this person, I am fully accepted by this person. What would that feel like? And if you stay there for a little while, you will actually start feeling those things. Exactly. Yeah. So this is the importance of questions that everyone can do. This kind of self-reflection, this mindfulness, really, that is so important in this process, because people need to understand that the negative thoughts that you have, even those automatic negative thoughts that feel very automatic, and in fact they might be, they just appear because of all sorts of things that we've unpacked already, even those automatic negative thoughts can be shifted, because you don't have to believe everything that comes to your mind, because not all thoughts are real, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, if you can get that in your head, that not everything that is negative that's coming into your head is real.
Yeah.
There's this propensity that we have to taking everything that's going on as fact and reality.
Yep.
And I perceive something, therefore it is real, is something that we just can't go, oh, just because I thought it doesn't mean it's real.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean, and
exactly.
liberating ourselves from this almost liberating ourselves from our thinking in one sense.
Yeah. So you can be objective, isn't it? It's like, so you can look at the thought.
Get another type of thinking.
Yeah.
Again, that's what you're doing. You're trying to engage with perspective, with, again, engage with logic, with your logical brain. And you can do that. You can use the tendency of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that is responsible for breaking things down and analyzing things and finding solutions to problems and finding the logic. And I referred to it a couple of weeks ago as the kind of the watchtower, the part of your brain that sees what's happening from above with perspective. You're engaging that part of your brain and using that mechanism, that type of design to help you challenge your own patterns of negative thoughts. And the other thing that we need to also understand is that your emotions, which are very high, and usually when you're experiencing flashbacks of trauma and all that kind of stuff, you're experiencing a lot of strong emotions. We also need to understand emotions, and we talked about it quite a lot a couple of weeks ago, but just remembering that emotions, first of all, they're not permanent, they're dynamic, they come and they go, they come in waves and they dissipate, which means that no matter how hard it feels right now, it will pass, it will get better, okay? And also understanding that emotions are not facts. They're not facts. They're your body's feedback system. It's your body's way of getting your attention to get you ready to action. That's what it is, but they're not facts.
All right, so let's just take it one step further and go, all right, just say I'm person A, here's person B.
What's up?
And I recognize this is happening. And I recognize that if I'm honest, I am isolated. I know that because I'm honest enough to acknowledge that. But now I realize that one of the keys to helping me get out of this is my connection with this person. Meaning he's a person who just can be a friend.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean someone I have to go and vomit my life over.
Yeah.
Just someone I'm just going to enter into a relational dynamic with friendship, take it that. And I recognize that that's the thing that I find hardest, but I'm prepared to acknowledge that's the thing I need to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But my mind goes, you can't, I won't, but he will, here's this.
What's he going to think? What's he going to, yeah.
So in my questioning and in my thinking practices that I sort of know how my wrong mind goes, but now what does my right mind say? Meaning wrong thought, right thought is. Ask myself, why do I feel like I don't even, here's a group, I'm going to walk into a connect group, into a group.
Yeah.
And there's going to be 10, 15 people in the room and it is intimidating.
Yeah.
For me because social connection is my answer. That's why I'm going to the group. But I realize this is probably the most difficult thing that I have to step into to get myself free of this.
Yeah.
So what are some of the practical things? I'm about to knock on the door, or I'm actually going to leave home to do it.
Yeah.
And my self-talk has already begun. That's how come I got out my door, but I haven't knocked on the door yet.
Yeah.
What are some of the, I know this sounds, for some people to go, oh, no, but this is real for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So what are some of the practicalities? I've got to ask myself, what sort of questions should I ask about myself?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that I need to go, okay, I need to think?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say in that example is pick one person. Pick one person from that group that you can, start opening up to. And opening up to about the present, about not necessarily about the past, because that's probably
That's a key thing, because if we're not careful, we're not trying to say to, I found Rocky, he looks like a nice guy, blah.
No.
And poor old Rocky's like, oh, whoa.
No.
And he's running for his life.
Yeah. No.
Right?
Just
it's about the present.
exactly. Just start with where you are today. And really start with where you are today, because people are very different and people will be at different levels of, you know, their experience, and some people will in fact need more than, you know, the support from friends. Some people might need, you know, lots of different things and psychological intervention, etc. But we're not talking about that. But we're talking about someone in that example who has been struggling with...
Always found social connection difficult.
Exactly, with social connection, for whatever reason. And I think the first and most practical thing that you can do for yourself is really to, in addition to kind of the self-dialogue that you've done already to get you to knock...
Give me some examples of the self-dialogue.
Well, first of all, like I said earlier, it's really challenging those thoughts that, oh, you know, they're not going to listen, or they're not going to accept, or what will they think, or to really start with being vulnerable with yourself and being very honest with yourself as well. And again, engaging with your rational brain through questions that will not only analyze and help you break down the patterns of thinking, because what's happening is you're, again, stuck in loops, in patterns of thinking and feeling.
So it changes the loop.
Yeah,
That's what
exactly. You need to break the loop. You need to break the cycles, the patterns of thinking.
Because otherwise, if you're not careful, you can bog into, now what questions? I've got to ask questions. Got to ask the right questions. What's the wrong question?
No, it's just break the cycle.
Questions breaks the cycle.
And you know where it ends anyway in that loop. You know, like, I'm going to think this, and that's going to make me think this, and I'm going to stay at home. And I'm going to think this, I'm going to, you know, those flow charts where it's just like, it's like, oh, okay, I know that leads me home.
So it's not about how special the questions are.
No.
It's about the questions, because it breaks this negative cycle of thinking.
That's it. You're stuck in the pattern, and the question helps you. It stops you. It stops that cycle. That's what it's about. And once you've done that, and again, you know, it's not about which questions, it's about the questions and what they do for you to get you out of that pattern.
It's what the questions do for you. It's not about the right questions.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. And again, and before moving forward, this is actually really important, because people are looking for answers. And they haven't realized that the answer is the question. It's what you ask yourself. Yeah. That's a lot more important than having the right answers, is actually having questions that will help break those patterns of thinking, and questions that will challenge those patterns of thinking, and questions that will open up more forward-thinking processes, right? Those questions that go with, I wonder what would happen if. You know, what if, you know, hypotheses are really important, actually, because those are the creative questions that I referred to earlier. Questions that hypothesize, that throw in different angles. Again, what you do with hypothesizing is you're, again, switching on your rational brain, and you're switching your creativity, your imagination, not in a negative direction, but in a positive direction, which is incredibly powerful, because then you'll start triggering positive thoughts and positive emotions as well, which, as we know, are super important in the healing journey for the brain.
Like we were saying, if there's no hope, we spoke about hope a couple of sessions ago, and if there's no hope, if there's no vision for a future that will benefit me, then naturally you're not going to break the loop, because if you're like, the future is only this, it's dark, negative, and it's going to be where I am, those questions, that breaking of the loop, those creating those opportunities for your brain to wander into hope, allows you a different alternative to what you've already existed in. And gives you probably the confidence to even engage in that reality, because it's a positive reality that you need to create for yourself.
So would I be right in saying the thing that, the thing that is going to help me the most is probably the thing that I fear the most?
Yeah. We love it, don't we? It always happens.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. But you see, we're breaking it down, and there is a way forward. And again, what's useful for people to understand is also that, you know, the problem is when you get stuck. And it's like that with everything. It's like we were having another conversation just earlier about grief, and about how a lot of people are experiencing a lot of grief and sadness, and really grief due to the loss of loved ones, or the loss of the normality or the loss of jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And most people are familiar with the 5 stages of grief, the model from Kubler-Ross, the denial, depression, bargaining, acceptance, et cetera, et cetera. And we were just having a conversation about that and how important it is for people to keep moving through each stage, to take time to process each stage, but at the same time, the problems happen when people get stuck in one of the stages. For example, they get stuck in the depression stage and they can't seem to get out of it, or they get stuck in another stage. And the other problem is when people start going into loops. So because they haven't processed one of those stages enough, they can't move forward. Their brain keeps going back. Their emotions keep going back to the denial stage, for example, because they still haven't processed that properly. And it's the same with all of this conversation that we're having. It's important that people know that it's a journey, it's a process, but it's important to not get stuck, to keep moving forward. That's what questions help you with. They help you move forward. They help you slowly but surely shift your mindset, your patterns of thinking. And this thing that we're breaking down in a conversation, the questions and the thing that you need to do before you knock on the door, and we haven't even talked about what happens after you knock on the door, but because this thing could take weeks for someone, it could take maybe hours for someone else, or it could take months for someone else. This process that we're trying to talk about in 5 minutes in this conversation of, asking different questions, all of this could actually take a long time. That's okay, because people are different, and what works for someone like that doesn't work for someone else like that.
Yeah, and I think for people to give themselves the freedom, it took you a long time to get you to this place, so don't be impatient with getting out of this place.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, I realize that there's an out now.
Exactly.
But my out is not
Exactly.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's not just out like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes, especially within our tradition, like Christians, like, oh yeah, you're healed, you're done, it's finished, you're good. Yeah? Welcome to the family and everything's good. But like I was saying, it's like we create the space for the miraculous, but understanding that it's a process. Like some of these things are a process, like you said. All this thing is imprinted in cement. Like that's going to be a process of whittling that out, to rebuffer that, to like shave it all down to a new surface. And I think that's what, so it's giving yourself grace almost to understand that like, yeah, like there is hope to get through. And I love like, though I walk through the valley of death, it's like there is an active movement through it.
Yeah.
Do you mean like going through something means that you're actively progressing forward through it?
Yeah.
And all of these, like you said, in these particular seasons, there is a forward motion through them, but then acknowledging and giving yourself grace that you are on a journey to it rather than you instantly arrive.
Yeah, exactly. And even, again, what trauma does to people is it robs people from that sense of agency, that sense of control over what happens to you, which is inbuilt in us. Everything in our body and our brain functions based on that assumption that you're in charge of what happens to you. And trauma robs you, the experience of trauma robs you from that. And some of the research says that that's why the fragile mind can't process the traumatic event as, another normal memory, and that's why everything kicks in to defend the mind, because it's so horrible and so catastrophic, that notion that something happens and something is robbed from you, that the fragile mind can't take it, and that's why it's sort of protected. But back to this process, I think it also helps people to understand that this is a journey that will be punctuated with transitions and turning points.
Because that's where,
rather than...
Paul talks about in Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's this, I have to renew. I've got to bring about new patterns of thinking. I have to, my mind is, everything from who I am in Christ. And I think sometimes people see themselves in Christ as I'm perfect because of Christ. Well, I am, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I am in the who I am in Christ, in God's perspective, got all of this. There's this perfection of Christ
Yeah.
that becomes my perfection. But that's found, it's like, Paul says, in my weaknesses, he is made strong.
Yes.
That's where we need him.
Yeah.
And being able to be open enough, vulnerable enough to bring God into.
Yeah.
Because I think if we're not careful, we can spend a lot of time hiding
Yeah.
the parts of our lives from God. When we're not, it's not hiding these parts from God, it's bringing these parts to him,
Yeah.
that he becomes my strength in this weakness, as opposed to I need to hide it from him because I'm supposed
Like I
to be
hide it
perfect
from
before-
others.
Yeah, I've got to hide it from God because I'm supposed to be perfect.
Yeah.
And whereas we're not supposed to hide it from God, we're supposed to bring him into it.
Yeah. Exactly.
That it's where
Yeah.
that's where we discover him in this,
Yeah.
this what's going on
in
in
that
our
picture.
lives.
Absolutely.
You said something great earlier in terms of like when we were talking about, you talked about vulnerability, and you said like one of the hardest things is for us to be vulnerable to ourselves. And then the second hardest thing is to be vulnerable to like a perfect God that we serve. And I think that if you're, just practically, I mean, if you're person A and you struggle to even be vulnerable to other people, the first person you can always be vulnerable to is God, knowing that a loving God creates space for you to abide in God. Do you mean? So like, it may be that maybe a human face is too much, but like God's arms are always open for you to be, he already knows everything. So you're coming before a God that already knows everything that you're trying to hide already. So there's no shame in being naked before a God that is inviting you to heal with God's self. Do you mean? Like God is an open door for you to heal with God. And sometimes that may be, even before you've got to the door to knock, like inviting God even in that process so that he can walk with you to the door.
Yes.
Is one of the biggest, like, God's an open door in inviting you to heal with God.
Yes.
And I think it's like taking that and being like, oh, okay, you know what? I feel like this, and I feel like this, and I feel like this, and I'm not going to compartmentalize it away from God. I'm gonna be naked and unashamed before the person that loves me so much that they want me to. It's an invitation, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, and then you're there, you knock on the door. Okay, you knock on the door.
Yeah.
You're knocking. Anyone home? And I think, as I was saying earlier, I think it's important to choose one or two people.
Yeah, because what, got to just keeping the focus. It's like the thing that I need the most is the thing I fear the most.
Yeah.
And social connection is the thing I need. Yet the trauma has broken my ability to actually develop true social connection with people.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the trauma has broken the thing that I need, my ability to engage in the thing I need the most. And that's where the tension now is.
Absolutely. And again, with that, what you need to remember is that the trauma imprints stay in all levels of your existence, really. So again, that means that to heal, you need to address all levels of human existence. So the relational level is one aspect, but at a cognitive level, so your thoughts, which is why we were having the whole conversation earlier, at an emotional level, and with that comes the whole work that we talked about in previous weeks on, first of all, normalizing the negative emotions by understanding that, they come, they go, by understanding what they're there for, why they're there, and then trying to counteract the impact of those negative emotions with the positive emotions. So being very intentional about, and that's the emotional management that we explored in previous weeks. At an existential level, which is really interesting, but it's the kind of challenging our own worldviews and this awareness of all this stuff that we're talking about helps with that. So really starting to challenge how we see ourselves, how we see others, the sense-making, it's the meaning-making system that we have. And I think it's important that we understand that this process needs to be holistic. We need to combine all of these different elements. We need to, it's, you know, by the time you knock on the door and you start finally get the courage to start reaching out to maybe just one person. And again, by reaching out is, you know, normalizing whatever that means, reaching out. It's not, you know, open, yeah, that's not what we're talking about, but it's just starting with where you are. And, you know, starting to take steps to connect with someone. And like I said, just choose one person, choose a couple of people, and, you know, have coffee with that person and start just really trying to normalize what human connection feels like today in this healing journey that you're in, where you still have lots of things, lots of reactions being triggered. You still have lots of emotions. You still have some thoughts. You're on this journey, but you need to start normalizing human connection again. And you need to do that in small steps. And you need to start with the present rather than the past or the future. Start with where you are, small steps. And I think that's really important.
So what about, so now, so do I need to manage my expectations of the people that I'm engaging?
What do you think, Rocky?
I mean, yeah, humans are great, but yeah, I think you have no. We've talked about it being a process, right? And we've also talked about how these imprints and triggers are involuntary and can be completely different to different people, right? So therefore, there's always going to be some sort of gap between me being able to embody what you've experienced, right? So there has to be a grace on both sides because, for example, if you come to me with, hey, I've got this, there's always going to be an element of, I want to take that off you, but there's always, everyone's a human being trying to understand. And if I can't completely embody your truth, there's always going to be a distance between the two, right? But as person B, I too am on that journey with you of discovery, of empathy, of understanding, of healing too, because I'm trying to learn. It's having a grace that by inviting the person to your trauma almost, inviting that person into that process, they're part of the process of healing, as opposed to someone's going to come with a magic wand and like heal you.
And realizing that you're not going to fully understand.
Yeah, completely.
And your job is not to fully understand.
Yeah.
That's really important for people.
Yeah.
It's not their job. They don't need to fully understand.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Because that's going to be a tension point. And obviously that's going to be frustrating as well. There always comes with a frustration with that because it's like, I want you to, there's always going to be a want to understand so that you can truly see people's
because
hurt.
the thing that people got to get hold of, I'm trying to get this out of my system.
Yeah.
And into a part of my system that can actually manage it, and this is no longer going to rule me. It's not about I need to be understood. It's about getting it out of me.
Yeah.
And so putting the burden on someone to go, well, you don't understand me. No, the goal is not for them to understand you. The goal is for you to get this out of ruling your life. And it's not crucial that Rocky would understand every detail. It's crucial that I get it out. And so the connection with other people, talking things through with other people, it's not, because I can just imagine, because some people just go, but you don't understand. You need to understand me. No, because you need to understand me can be a false sense of I have to justify myself.
Yeah.
And we've got to find before God, we
Yeah.
don't have to justify ourselves. He's the one that justifies us. Right?
Yeah.
So I've got to let that go. It's more about engaging in social connection
Yeah.
that actually helps me get this thing that's trapped in my body, this trauma, out of it,
Yeah.
and to get free of it.
Yeah.
The goal is not to be understood.
Yeah.
Would that be
And also, yes, and also remember that trauma is pre-verbal. So again, when you experience trauma, the Broca's area, the part of your brain, one of the speech centers in your brain, basically, again, is switched off. So it's offline. And that's why most people can't even explain in detail, in a logical account of events, what actually happened, because all trauma is pre-verbal in the human experience.
Yeah.
So you're right. Yeah. It's not about being understood. It's about processing things, and processing is really it's letting it through, and it's lessening. And what that does, that whole process, what it does is it lessens the impact of those trauma imprints.
Yeah, because I think people find themselves under this pressure of, I need to be understood for it to be sorted out, right? And you need to understand me.
Yeah.
If I feel like for you to accept me, you need to understand me. And if you take the pressure off, this whole engagement of the need for it is about getting it out of who I am.
It is. And that's why the most important thing is, more than being understood, the most important thing is feeling listened to and feeling seen.
Yeah.
That's what the traumatized brain needs the most. What is it that you need from social connection, from human connection? You need to feel seen again. You need to feel listened to again. Because remember, when trauma happened, what breaks the brain, literally, is the fact that when you experience trauma, your first port of call to the human brain, which is when something happens, when something hurts, the first thing that we want to do is reach out to another human being. That's automatic. Any human that experiences a traumatic event the first thing that they will want to do is cry for help, for someone else. When you don't have someone else there, that's when your system starts breaking, literally. And you start going to your other default systems, until you get to the baseline, which is when you completely shut down, and all your systems shut down, and only your heart keeps beating, your lungs keep. So you breathe, you're alive, but your mind is completely gone. But the first thing that we all need desperately when we experience pain is other human beings. So that's the thing that we need to heal. We need to feel heard. We need to feel seen. And that's not necessarily about being understood.
No. And also understanding comes, again, with the process, it comes over time, I feel. So initially, if you're like, I need to be understood straight away, it's like, we haven't got a level of intimacy. We haven't developed a level of intimacy for me to understand you. So if I'm heard and seen straight off the bat, over time, through the process, through intimacy, there will be a natural understanding of the nuances and the cadences and the depth. But the first step is, like you said, just even opening the door for that relationship to even happen in the first place, making that connection, because that, like any neurological pathway, the more that you have that thought, the more that you have that conversation, the more that you go for a coffee, the more that the intimacy, the lower the intimacy level is, the more the nuances and the more the understanding comes. But the first point of call, I can't call Gary and be like, "Yo, mate, this happened to me." Brrr, and Gary's like, "I have no idea." And I'm like, sorry. Like, no, because it can't work like that.
Yeah.
Over a year of talking to Gary about a particular topic or a particular emotion or a particular experience that I have, Gary's going to become first, more nuanced. Okay, there's a clearer understanding. There may be, but it's always also has to be understood. It's always going to be to a level. Yeah. Because if he hasn't embodied that trauma, there's always going to be a space of...
Yeah, and I think it's also important that people understand that if I've got trauma and I walk into this group of people and just say you're reflective of a group of people, I'm not trying to find a trauma partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? What I've got to recognise is just basic social interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the present in life is what I need. Now, who I process this trauma with, that might be a pastor,
Yeah.
it might be a group leader who's competent, or I see as, I can be open with. Could be a therapist.
Yeah.
Could be, you can have that, you can develop that person that I'm going to deal with my junk with you, but that doesn't mean that I can't be, doesn't mean I don't, now I've got someone who helps me with my junk, doesn't mean I don't need relationships with who he represents. The reality is I've got to get into this. I have socialization, social connection, and it doesn't have to be all about my trauma.
No, that's very important actually, because you're right. Your social system is not necessarily, the people that help you process the actual trauma might not be in your social system. Your social system is part of your brain feeling safe again, that will enable you to then process your trauma. And you can have a therapist that you talk to, or your pastor, or someone else. But that element of, again, you're knocking at the door, and you open the door, and
I'm not going into group to find a therapist.
No.
I'm finding social connection.
Yeah.
People just to connect with, do life with.
So you're creating an environment.
The healing process.
That's it. So that's what it's about. You're creating a healing environment for your brain, for your mind, for your heart, for your entire system. That's what this is about.
And feeding life as well into, like we talk about, like those positive thoughts, those positive ways of thinking. Like it's a space for you to be feeding life, positivity, hope, all those things. And also it's person A carries a version of and a reflection of Christ that someone else in that group setting may need to see to heal them as well. And I think we can trauma completely sometimes undervalues the Christ that we carry and the importance that someone else actually, you going to that group is healing for someone else because you've turned up with a reflection of Christ that they need to see in their healing process. And that's what the beauty of groups is that if we've so many different people from different walks of life and different understandings come together to heal together, one day you might be a version of Christ that I need to see that day. You may be that, even if we don't talk about my trauma.
Yeah.
You in a conversation over a coffee, randomly have spoken hope into my life that I didn't even or I can do that for you. And I think it's part of the responsibility as well for the people, the person B as well, to create these environments, to create safe, sacred spaces for people to come in, irrespective of what they've experienced, for their Christ to be acknowledged first and foremost, because that's what's going to heal.
Yeah,
everybody
I believe
in that
that's so good, Rocky. You're spot on, and I think.
Oh, you.
Such a good conversation. I hope people understand this is an actual conversation that we're having.
Yeah, this is great, isn't it? It's actual conversation.
We're actually having a conversation, and that is such a good point. Because that's the systemic healing that happens in these kind of, it's the systemic healing is that process that happens organically. Where no one is being anyone's therapist.
That's it, and that's the key. Because I think I caution people, don't turn people into your therapist.
No.
Because that's
not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and it's something that's absent from your life because the trauma has, as I read that quote, switched off your ability to have normal social engagement. So we're talking about just having normal social engagement as a part of the get over it aspect to life.
Yeah.
We're not talking about you need to now I'm going to walk into a group.
Yeah.
Rocky, you're my therapist, and I go after you.
Yeah,
like,
and everyone starts. Yeah, no, that's
so it's not that. It's about re-engaging normal socialization.
Exactly.
And social connection.
Exactly.
That's what we're talking about.
And how healing that is. That in itself is such a key element of the whole journey.
And it's the most difficult thing because that's the thing that gets damaged in the trauma.
Yeah. So there has to be some element of, fundamentally, there has to be an element of stepping out in faith by the person that is experiencing the trauma. Because like you just said, you said a couple of times, the scariest thing is the thing that's going to heal you.
Yeah.
So there has to be an act of faith to knock on that door, to have these questions. There has to be, at the core of it,
Yeah.
there has to be an act of faith to break even the smallest loop.
Exactly. And for person B, if I may jump
Yeah.
in. So for person A, what you said, for person B, there has to be an element of just listening and being, all of us being open to really just listen to each other and to, in our relationships and in our interactions with others, empathy, listening, just seeing people and making sure that they are seen, they feel listened to, and that you're listening to people not necessarily, not just or always, or not to fix them because you can't,
Yeah.
not to teach them or not to, win arguments or whatever, but that you're listening to just connect with people and let people experience this sense of psychological safety that they really need. So you're not fixing anyone, you don't have to, you get the pressure off because you don't need to fix or heal people, you just need to demonstrate empathy and make sure that people around you feel listened to.
Awesome. Okay, so we could keep talking forever. So hopefully you found this helpful, and just coming back to, I just quoted that verse in Luke chapter 4, and where Jesus said that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to heal. One of the things that he talked about was to heal the brokenhearted, and with bruised insides, and that's probably one of the best ways to maybe describe trauma and the work of Christ in our lives. And I want to encourage you to just keep constantly looking out to him, and at the same time, when it comes to realizing you need other people in your life, and just taking things, thinking. The Bible talks about take every thought captive, and there's a whole lot of things like this. But I think the thing I want to encourage you most is when the work of the Holy Spirit is our comforter, he's our counselor. So they're asking the questions. Don't be surprised you might get some God answers as you ask the questions as well. And where do I do? How do I handle this? That's in John, in the Message Bible, talks about the Holy Spirit. He takes us by the hand and he leads us in all truth. Truth not being about what's right or wrong, what's good or bad. Truth, the realities of life and the work of God in our life. And I just want to encourage you in all the stuff we've been talking about, there's lots of stuff to understand. There's lots of stuff to put into practice. But the awesome news about all of this is we can invite God into every step of this, and I want to encourage you to do that. Amen. Thanks, guys. It's been good.